that looking okay?
Looks great.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Hey, here we go. So lest we forget, basically, we are just a speck in the universe. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through. The world of science fiction, and we're going to kind of what someone said to me the other day. Basically, look at the other parallel universe that we have on this planet that is generally quite hidden to the vast majority of you. So I run 3 companies. I'm the CEO of the 311 Institute, which is a futures and deep futures think tank. So that's where we look at between 10 to 50 years out. Most multinationals want to look about 10 years out. Sovereign governments, when we look at the future of transportation and skills, education, infrastructure, energy, all those kinds of things, want to look typically 20 to 50 years out. I also run the World Futures Forum and XPotential University. So those are 2 philanthropic organizations. Because frankly, my core mission is to try to put an end to inequality in the world. And while what I do is only a drop in the ocean, I still think, nevertheless, anything that we can do to move the dial, such as what we're doing here today, is important. So I work with a whole variety of different companies all the way around the world across sectors. So whether it's Microsoft on the future of artificial intelligence, Sky and Co, basically, and companies like Viacom on the future of entertainment, Huawei and Samsung basically on the future of smartphones and consumer gadgets and devices, Airbus on the future of transportation, GEMS on the future of education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And irrespective of the companies that sort of arrive at my door, every single one of their industries is being transformed in ways that they never thought possible before. So typically, sort of put it in graph form, I work basically at the far left of this graph, basically with new technologies and innovation. So what I do is I look at a lot of different emerging technologies, try to understand how they can be combined, try to forecast out the implications of those different technologies, how they can be used, the problems they can be used to solve, and then we see how we can sort of get those different sort of game-changing or revolutionary blockbusters basically into the market. And then, of course, from a company perspective, most organizations on the left-hand side want to try to disrupt. So most startups want to try to disrupt something or other. But then once they become a mature organization, they're often the ones that are being disrupted. So this is sort of where we end up with this virtuous cycle of disruption being kicked off. And I have a couple of series of a couple of books basically. So if you want to download this, just go to the explore part of the website, thump in a code. This particular book is the Codex of the Future. It's got over 250 exponential technologies in there that are all explained in sort of layman's terms. And I'm going to step you through what happens when we start combining some of these different technologies together and start taking you down the wormhole. That's it. And once you start as a futurist going down the wormhole, you just suddenly discover that there are all these different worlds and universes to be explored. And some of them genuinely look alien. But from a futurist's perspective, I'm always sort of reminded by this kind of what I call the time traveler's dilemma. If we take an education example, if I stepped back 40 years ago, 30 years ago, even arguably 20 years ago, and managed to get an audience with the headmasters and mistresses of different schools, maybe the prime ministers and particular sort of ministers of government, and I said to them, in 20 to 40 years time, we will have this thing called the internet. It will connect 3.5 billion people on the planet together. It will transform every corner of society, industry, and culture. And some of the jobs that this thing called the internet will help create will include professions like cybersecurity. Yeah. At that point, you'd just be shown this, the door. And it's exactly the same if I went in and had similar conversations even 10 years ago, or at most 10 years ago, basically with the CEOs of automotive manufacturers and said, I predict that in 10 years' time, you won't be making combustion engine vehicles. You are going to be making hybrid and EV vehicles. You are going to be making vehicles that drive themselves. And you are no longer going to try to sell these products to customers. You are going to try and sell them as a service. Again, I'd be shown this thing called the door. And yet here we are with the entire global automotive industry now flipping and investing hundreds, if not trillions of dollars, building these next generation EVs and autonomous vehicles and so on and so forth. So anything that typically seems like a crazy idea in the short term might be a crazy idea, but over time, crazy is the new normal. So I track over 450 exponential technologies. We always typically talk about, sort of one or two, like artificial intelligence or blockchain, basically, or virtual reality or augmented reality. And they're very, very difficult to sort of visualize. So I've created something that I call a starburst. On the starburst, there are over 168 exponential technologies. 25 of those technologies are as impactful as artificial intelligence. And here are some of them. So I won't go through them all, but they're in the codex. So for example, the theory behind this wheel is it goes from the year 2020 to 2070. It's a 50-year view. If you go step around the wheel, so we have advanced manufacturing, that's how you make your product. You have compute, that's the type of compute that you put into your product. Connectivity, that's how you connect it. Electronics, how you, power and energy. Intelligence, materials, the materials that you make it out of. So the idea is that you step around this wheel, and this is your wheel of fortune when it comes to helping you create next generation products and services. But when we have a look at some of the things that are coming through, so I won't spoil the party too much. If we have a look at connectivity, basically we've got low Earth orbit platforms that are going to be connecting the other 3.5 billion people on the planet. From an electronics perspective, we have self-healing electronics starting to come through. We've also got reconfigurable electronics starting to come through. When we start having a look at energy, basically, we already see a path to something called quark energy. So quark energy was discovered as a theoretical type of energy by CERN when they were looking for the Higgs boson, and it is 8 times more powerful than fusion. When we have a look at intelligence, we have creative machines coming through. We also, from an artificial intelligence perspective, we've already 3D printed artificial intelligences. So you can print an AI onto paper. We've also used DNA to make artificial intelligence. So we have artificial intelligences, neural networks that are made out of DNA, not out of bits and bytes or binary code, basically like the ones that we use every time we plug into Google. And then basically for when we start having a look at things like, materials, there's all sorts of different things sort of going on, and compute. From a compute perspective, we have liquid computers. We can start seeing the individual components coming through. We have biological computers over in China. They've managed to turn biology itself into a computer. So we're on the 5th generation of biological computer that is a bacteria. So when we start talking about the future, a lot of the things that we think of as the future and of as science fiction are actually already here. And in fact, science fiction starts looking a little bit lame to what we are now on the verge of creating. So from a disruptive perspective, everything is getting faster. When you ask people how fast they think we're moving today, whether it's faster or slower than it was 10 years ago, invariably they say that we're moving faster today than we did 10 years ago. When you ask them whether or not they think we're going to be moving faster in another 10 years than we are today, they invariably answer yes. And again, the reason for that is when you have a look at the sort of powerful technologies that we became accustomed to in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, really it was just computing. We all knew that computers next year would be more powerful and more cost effective than they were last year. And we could try to figure out what can we do next year when we have a more powerful computer. We could ingest more information, analyze more information, that kind of thing. But the reason why everything's now speeding up is because we have a huge variety of technologies that are all coming down the line at the same time. So we've got 5G that's rolling out, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, genetic engineering, quantum technologies coming through, robotics and VR. And when all of a sudden you go to a startup and say, so in the past, you could play with computers. and maybe the internet and bits and bobs. Now you've got all these different technologies that you can play about with. What could you do with these? What problems could you solve with these? All of a sudden, the different types of combinations become almost infinite. And all of these technologies are increasingly powerful. They're also democratized. They're cheaper to get access to. If you want access to the world's most sophisticated artificial intelligence, go to Google, download TensorFlow, it's free. So this concept of democratization hits everything. From a disruption perspective or a disruptive perspective, all of these different technologies also change the fundamental economics of industry. And it's every industry. You know, if you think about how much it costs you today to gain access to information, it's free. How much does it cost you to call or video chat with your relatives in Australia? It's pretty much nothing. We see the same effects taking hold with drug discovery. It used to cost $3 billion or more to create a vaccine to something like coronavirus. Now those costs are dropping because we're using artificial intelligence and supercomputers. It used to take 10 years to create a vaccine to things like SARS and MERS. Now we're on the verge of creating vaccines within a year that are deployed within a year. The cost of manufacturing is falling. The cost of transportation is falling. The cost of light is falling. You know, if you have a look, for example, at light, step back hundreds of years ago, and if you wanted to light your room, you'd have to buy a candle, and then you'd have to, you know, the amount of time that it would take you to light your room and the cost basically was actually quite high. Now you flick on a light switch. So all these different things, basically all of these different technologies are fundamentally changing the economics of everything that we consume, every industry basically that we hold dear. And so to put this really into context, yeah, when you have a look at the first digital camera back in 1976, the cost per megapixel was $7.2 million. No one was going to buy it for that price. Now it's well below 0.041. So within the space of about 55 years, the cost of a megapixel for your camera phone has fallen by 1.8 billion fold, billion with a B. When you have a look at storage, very similar story with storage. Yeah, in 1956, the first gigabyte hard drive needed to be loaded onto a plane. Yeah, it cost $820 million in real terms. Now, storage in the cloud, you know, whether it's Box, Dropbox, you know, Amazon S3 is pretty much free. So we've seen an almost 15 billion fold decline in the cost of storage over the past sort of 70 years. Now you start applying these same scale, you know, costs of scale to energy, manufacturing, transportation, you know, drug discovery, gene sequencing that used to cost $1 billion that now costs $1,000 or even $100, depending where you do it. And all of a sudden, basically, you're fundamentally changing what society can do, the technologies you have access to, and the problems that you can solve. Similarly, when we have a look at the speed, this is a sort of popular graph. It took 75 years for the telephone to reach 50 million users. Today, basically, Pokemon Go took 19 days to hit 50 million users. Call of Duty took 6 days to hit 100 million users. So think of it like this. At what point do I, as an entrepreneur or an individual, create a product, put it into the digital ether, bearing in mind we are all more connected than ever before? If my product, whatever it happens to be, can be downloaded or accessed by 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 million people in a day, I'm disrupting a global industry in a day. Now, to give you an example of this, Facebook created its own currency called Libra. They created a currency, they put it into Facebook, it freaked the Bank of England, the US Federal Reserve, and the People's Bank of China out so much that eventually it got sort of pulled. But if you think of Facebook, Facebook is essentially a virtual country of 2 billion people. Had Facebook been able to put that currency into its platform, that currency could have become the de facto global currency within the space of a week, a month, a very short period of time. Yeah. So today, basically, we are already at the point where one individual can influence billions around the world with an idea. I always think the most powerful thing that we have, basically, is an idea. And again, every industry is connected. So what happens in one industry then ripples around to all of them. But enough of that. So let's start talking about some science fiction stuff. So how many of you believe in magic? So there you go. We've got a couple of hands up. So magic basically is really this, from a magic perspective, the majority of people don't really believe in magic any longer because they're either looking for the trick or they just think it's a piece of technology. But nowadays, for example, we've created aliens. All of us on this call have something in common. We have 4 base pair DNA. Scientists over in the US, as well as China and Europe, have created organisms with 6 and 8 base pair DNA. That fundamentally breaks nature. And they put these into bacteria. So we have alien bacteria. So we've broken biology. We've broken the natural order. Deflector shields. If you want to create a deflector shield, you fire a laser at the upper Earth's atmosphere, the stratosphere. You create something called a Fermi lens effect, which deflects lasers. This is courtesy of British Aerospace. So all of the things that we think of as science fiction are already here in one form or another, albeit some of them relatively basic. Holograms, if you have a look at Blade Runner, for example, you see these massive holographic adverts, spinning ballerinas and so on and so forth. Holograms are science fiction, aren't they? But so a couple of years ago, we created the world's first free-to-air, 3D, live, living holograms. These are the real deal. They've not been made using augmented reality. There is no glass. There is no fakery. These are the real deal. These are the Princess Leia holograms that you see in Star Wars and so on and so forth. And we've created them using femto lasers, if you want to know the secret of the magic trick. And this year, they're this big, but they get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And in about 10 to 20 years, they'll be commercialized and everyone will have their own hologram. But as I say, science fiction has become real. And they come in all sorts of different colors. You can change the shapes and all sorts of things. Invisibility cloaks. Hyperstealth have used a technology called metamaterials to create Harry Potter invisibility cloaks. So the invisibility cloaks that you can hide behind and it shows you what's behind you and all that sort of stuff. If you want to have a look, there are plenty of YouTube videos on that. And they're copyrighted, so I couldn't really put them into here, but that's a fun technology. And that's done using something called metamaterials, as I say. Knowledge uploading. In 2015, a whole variety of different universities over in the US put US Top Gun pilots basically into a simulator, took some F-35s basically up to 35,000 feet, put them into a flat spin. And as they were doing this, the pilots basically were asked to land these planes and the researchers were recording their brainwaves. The pilots naturally landed the plane. Then they took a whole bunch of volunteers who'd never been in aircraft before, put skull caps on their heads again, replayed those brainwave forms to those people, took the aircraft up to 35,000 feet again, put them into a flat spin, and about 60% of the people landed the aircraft with no prior experience. So we actually are now at the point where we can upload knowledge matrix style. In the US, DARPA are now investing over $50 million basically in increasingly sort of developing this technology for a whole variety of different reasons. Lightsabers, lightsabers like the ones basically out of Star Wars. Over in China, they developed something called a plasma jet. They're very, very small. They're about an inch, but they are genuine tiny lightsabers. Actual lightsabers, not fake ones. Molecular assemblers, we've created DNA robots and molecular robots. We put the molecular robots basically into a production line, and they ended up creating molecular sized products. Very rudimentary. Again, you can look all these up, and if you click some of the QR codes basically on the magician slide, it'll take you to all of these so you can explore them for yourselves. But that is a rudimentary molecular assembler. And they'll take years to develop, but we already have them. Telepathy. Over in 2015, basically, we actually used telepathy, this is out of Harvard, to help people communicate telepathically with one another. Facebook, weirdly enough, hired Regina Duggan from DARPA to try to turn Facebook into the world's first telepathic network. There is also a technology called BrainNet that allows people to play telepathic Tetris with one another. So again, you know, when we start having a look at neuroscience and being able to unlock basically the secrets of the mind, yeah, we have come a long way over the past 10 years. Still lots to do, but telepathy, basically, we are starting to break those barriers down now. Neural streaming, you know, so I said basically the whole concept behind this deck basically is proof that we are living basically in the sci-fi age. This particular video is a little bit old now. There is a better one. I just haven't had time to edit it yet. What if we could take the thoughts that you were thinking, the images that you were thinking, yeah, your movie reels, and just stream them live to YouTube? So what we did is, on the left-hand side, we showed a whole variety of different volunteers' geometric shapes, and also showed them videos and everything else. There's a very good Russian video where they show people watching YouTube, and it decodes what they're watching into images that are grainy like this, but you can still discern basically that one is a car, one is an owl, one is a parrot, one is a, you know, an elephant movie. But what we're doing here is we're using skull caps and artificial intelligence to decode what people are thinking and put it into image form. Now, the mistake that we generally make is we think that the picture on the right is really grainy. 3 years ago, we couldn't do this. In 3 years' time, this will be much, much higher resolution, and it's already getting there. So this is streaming your brain to YouTube. When we look at tractor beams as well, University of Bristol, New York University, we can do this with light, we can do this with sound. This particular tractor beam is a sound-based tractor beam. When we start looking at the practical applications of tractor beams, like this one, so this is an ultrasound tractor beam. They call them acoustic tweezers, such as researchers like to do. What you see, the gray sort of bed, is a set of ultrasonic transducers, and they are moving this particular blob backwards and forwards. You put the ultrasonic transducers into this contraption, and now you can manipulate that particular object. And these objects, we're able to do this increasingly with more and more objects, bigger objects and everything else. But if you combine an acoustic tractor beam with a 3D printer, you now have a 3D printer that can print different electronics and electronic components and parts and everything else, and that can then start assembling them themselves. So, for example, when you have a look at Hon Hai, the impact that this has on Hon Hai's business, Hon Hai are now trying to mature these particular types of technologies, and Hon Hai are increasingly trying to automate all of their different production lines, which puts about 1.2 million people out of business. So that's a tractor beam being used to create just a basic smartboard, but over time that gets better. Now, when we look at science fiction, today, basically, we are all entrepreneurs. We are the creators. Technology is the tool. So increasingly, we now live in a world, basically, of what I call creative machines. These are machines, basically, that can design and innovate and produce products independent of humans. So at the moment, basically, we are in the iterative phase. So they can take an existing product and they can make it better. We aren't quite there with primary innovation or disruptive innovation. But when you start combining these different exponential technologies together, such as artificial intelligence, more computing power, better materials, more advanced manufacturing like 3D and 4D printing, let alone things like molecular assemblers, you can start doing some quite special things. So here we actually have a product that designs itself. So we have sensors in a vehicle sending information back to a creative machine.
What if you could come up with thousands of options for a single design without drawing, all of which meet specific goals set by the designer? And from those options, pick the one design that delivers on the most important criteria, the design you couldn't possibly have imagined. This is generative design, a technology that harnesses massive computing power, creating forms with precise amounts of material only when needed, achieving maximum performance while wasting nothing. Generative design can be about much more than simply turning out alternatives. Prototypes can be scanned and equipped with sensors that provide real-time performance data that can loop back into the design process, so the object, in effect, co-designs itself. And depending on the material and method of manufacture chosen, the software can optimize the design for those choices. The things that have limited us in the past, software, materials, manufacturing, no longer do so. With generative design, the world can look and perform any way we want it to. This is the next stage in the evolution of design, and it's happening now.
So this is very much basically a case of you put sensors into a product.
I just had the pasta and sausage for breakfast, but that was it.
As the product basically sort of goes through its daily use, information about that product's usage basically is then fed directly back to a creative machine that then creates a better car. So we have a whole variety of different companies already using these things. We've got NASA using them to design interplanetary rovers.
The long drive.
We've got General Motors starting to use them to design cars.
You know, I can't just go there and
Airbus
pick one thing up.
Starting to create, starting to use it on the A320 Neo.
Amazon
and Under Armour starting to use it to design clothes and trainers. There's a Under Armour trainer called the Architect, which is $300. It was designed by an artificial intelligence. Google are using them to design computer chips. However, when you start combining 3D printing with creative machines, you now start getting to this point where all of a sudden you can create a self-evolving, self-manufacturing robot. So any of you have children who are being taught robotics, by the time they come out of school in 5, 10, 15 years, their robotic knowledge basically is going to be way out of date. So what we have here is we've given a robot the task of moving from one side of the room to the other as quickly as possible. And it's got sensors in it. As it moves from one side of the room to the other, all of the sensors are feeding information back to an artificial intelligence, a creative machine basically that's on the desk. Actually, it's under the desk there. That creative machine then goes through thousands of simulations a second to try to figure out a better design for that robot to help it meet its goals. That robot, once it's got robot version number 2, it 3D prints it off in the back, and a high-paid engineer assembles the robot, puts it back on the floor. But if you use a 4D printer like we used in MIT 2 to 3 years ago, you have a self-evolving robot that can print itself and then walk off the printer. So this is just an example basically of where we already are with technology. We have products that are capable of self-evolving, and when you start linking them up to different industrial processes, they can manufacture themselves autonomously as well. And there we go. Basically, the robot sort of goes back across the floor and sends data back, and the whole cycle repeats. So, however, that particular technology I showed you there increases the rate of innovation anywhere between 10,000 and 100,000 fold. This next technology increases the rate of innovation hundreds of millions of fold. It's being used by companies like Amazon to train their autonomous drones, Google to train their autonomous cars. In silico have designed 30,000 drugs in 21 days. You can see the time that it takes to develop new products is just coming down like crazy. Toyota designed a new electric vehicle battery in 16 days and tested it in 16 days. Normally this stuff takes 2 years. And then OpenAI crammed hundreds of years of training to create the world's most dexterous robot hand?
We're trying to build robots that learn a little bit like humans do, by trial and error. What we've done is train an algorithm to solve the Rubik's Cube one-handed with a robotic hand, which is actually pretty hard even for a human to do. We don't tell it how the hand needs to move the cube in order to get there. The particular friction that's on the fingers, how easy it is to turn the faces on the cube, what the gravity, what the weight of the cube is, all of these things, it needs to learn by itself. The interesting thing is that kind of standard techniques in robotics haven't been able to scale to that complexity that we see in a robotic hand. Humans have evolved to be able to manipulate and operate our hands. So there's a huge amount of learning that's happened through evolution to get us to this point as a species. And the robot has to learn all of this from scratch. Instead of trying to write very dedicated algorithms to operate such a hand, we took a different approach where we create thousands of different simulated environments and learn to do the task in all of those. And hopefully the robotic hand will be able to do it in the real world as well. This means like thousands of years of experience that this neural network has had in simulation. Every time the algorithm has gotten good at the task, we make the task harder. That's really crucial because it needs exposure to really complicated environments in order to eventually be robust to the real world.
So there we've crammed thousands, we've used a virtual environment and we've created a product in a virtual environment, trained it in a virtual environment, crammed thousands of years of training into just weeks to create the world's most dexterous robotic hand that can solve a Rubik's Cube one-handed within a minute. Yeah, how many of us can do that? So everything is accelerating. When we have a look at the future of the workforce though, just a sort of little bit of a quick bit here, increasingly, when we start combining behavioral computing with artificial intelligence, something interesting happens. We get to the point where we democratize access to expertise. So if you've ever wanted to be a famous artist, if you work in sales, but you want to create an award-winning advert, for example, or whatever it happens to be, at the moment, basically, those skills are beyond you. If you want to program, but you aren't a programmer, then we have the advent of no-code platforms coming through that can help you there, and platforms that you can just talk to, like Microsoft Deepcoder and Google Bayou, that you talk to, and they will build the applications for you without you needing any experience. Law, we have companies like Law Geeks, we have Ross Intelligence over in the US that will do your contracts for you. But for those of you who are really rubbish artists, let's pick a skill. So what skill do you want to be able to tap into today? Maybe it's creativity, but maybe you are rubbish at drawing or creating videos or whatever it happens to be. So this is from NVIDIA. Remember, if you are rubbish at drawing, it doesn't matter any longer.
Let's try waterfall just by pulling water down from the top there. Okay.
Wouldn't it be great if everybody could be an artist? If we could take our ideas and turn them into compelling images? This technology allows us to create a smart paintbrush so that if you wanted to create a new picture, you can just draw the shapes of the objects that you want, and the neural network can then fill in all the details. If we add a water feature, the network is able to add reflections, not because we told it that, but because it learned it. Or if we change the ground to be covered in snow, then it knows that the sky also needs to be a different color. I really think this technology is going to be great for architects, designers, people making virtual worlds to train robots and self-driving cars. The input to this model is something we call a segmentation map. It's like a coloring book picture that describes, here's where a tree is, here's where the sky is, here's where the ground is, and it doesn't have any details. And then the neural network is able to fill in all the texture and shadows and the colors based on things that it's learned from a large database of real-world images.
I would like to see a tree reflecting in that pond.
The real advance here is that we're able to synthesize images with a lot more diversity and more fidelity than we were able to in the past. I really think this technology is going to be great for the dreamers of the world.
So what happens when you no longer need to learn a skill to use it? What happens when you can just tap into a skill, whether it's programming, law, whether it's creativity in all its forms, and a whole variety of different things aside? And when we start having a look at the future of education, these are all the soft skills that increasingly our children will need: adaptability, collaboration with humans and artificial intelligences, confidence, creativity, curiosity. Again, all of these basically are in the codexes that are on the site. So feel free to thump through those at your leisure. But when we start having a look at the impact of all these different technologies, when we combine these technologies with our own problems, basically in innovation and creativity, you can do some amazing things basically to every single industry on the planet. Every single industry on the planet is being upended. So, for example, how would we like to cure famine? So when we start looking at curing famine today, typically we think it's a case of we need more fields, more cows, we need more fields for crops, whatever it happens to be. Actually, when we start having a look at, should we say, curing famine basically from a protein perspective, all you need is, as it turns out, one chicken called Ian.
We've all been there, right? In the grocery store. Oh, I'll just buy this meat. And there it is. And all we have to do is buy it. We don't have to think about what it took to make that chicken in that nice packaging. But the reality of the way that it came about, it's incredibly unsustainable. And that's one of the biggest problems facing humanity right now. But we figured out a way to solve it. The whole idea is that that chicken in itself has an unlimited source of itself, and there is a way where you can take just a handful of cells and keep growing them essentially infinitely. For those very first cells, it was important to us how we got the cells, not just that we got the cells. We came up with the idea to use one feather from the single best chicken that we could find. Take down.
First thing we need to do is we need to identify a cell that we're going to use as the basic starter material. And then what we need to do is find a food for it to grow in. So we have to identify the right set of nutrients that will cause the cells to multiply, but not just multiply, but do so quickly and into high densities.
It was an out-of-body experience to sit there and eat a chicken, but have the chicken that you're eating running around in front of you. You don't imagine doing something like that.
So there we take one cell from a chicken, we create chicken nuggets. We can do that basically with any animal, basically from a panda to a zebra to a cow, basically to a duck, and as well as fish. You combine these lab-produced meats basically with vertical farms, and you can feed people basically in the middle of Africa, in the middle of the UAE, wherever it happens to be. From a communications perspective, we are now starting to deploy 12,000 satellites into low Earth orbit with companies like Starlink and SpaceX to connect the other 3.5 billion people on the planet. So what happens, especially when we have all 7.5 billion people on the planet connected? You know, what happens basically to business and opportunity and ideas and the proliferation of ideas, good and bad? From a construction perspective as well, we are already at the point where we can 3D print buildings. But what about 3D printing a building with a nuclear reactor? Is that possible? So this is a community in Mexico. This is now printed. It took a day to print. And there are lots more of these types of examples. So using these different types of technologies, we're able to 3D print entire communities in a day, and those buildings cost about $2,000 to produce. Bearing in mind, costs always start up here and then decelerate rapidly. We have villages over in China being 3D printed. We in 2021 over in Dubai, they want to 3D print an 80-story skyscraper. But I did say we wanted to 3D print a house with a nuclear reactor. Now you could 3D print solar panels or something like that, but yeah, let's 3D print a nuclear reactor. So this is the US Department of Energy. This is the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory 3D printing a nuclear reactor, complete with nuclear core. Now, you might not necessarily want to 3D print your house, basically complete with its own 3D printed nuclear reactor, but these are miniature nuclear reactors created in a lab. So this starts showing you just how far we have come with these different technologies. Yeah, and then all of a sudden, basically from a human perspective, this starts opening up the question, if we can do this, what else can we do? So we've cured famine, we've 3D printed houses with our own nuclear reactors, and but there's even more, and that keeps going. So from an energy perspective, we've got a Cambrian explosion of new energy technologies, and there are far too many to go through here. But we've got bio batteries, we've got biohybrid PV, which are solar panels that are actually made out of bacteria. We've got different 3D printed lithium ion batteries with 500 times the energy density of traditional batteries, which all of a sudden gives us electric aircraft. Structural batteries are batteries where the product is the battery. We have wireless charging and long range wireless energy transmission like we have over in New Zealand at the moment. Wireless charging and long range wireless transmission, whether it's via radio, laser or microwave transmission, means that you can fundamentally get rid of all of the world's energy infrastructure. Think of all the power lines above or below ground. Using different sort of solar technologies or renewable technologies, we can get rid of power stations. So that's a whole conversation in itself. But on the small scale, basically, we already have nano generators. So nano generators, these have been invented over in China. They sit in the human bloodstream and they generate electricity from human blood. What you'd use it for, not really sure at the moment, but we can do it. You know, and that's the case with a lot of these different technologies. We can do it, and then people go, now what do we use it for? And that's sort of the crux. When we look at solar, if you go down to IKEA or your favorite store today and buy a commercial solar panel, they are 17% efficient. We have a path to 132% efficient solar panels, thanks to black silicon. We can get to 32% efficiency with Perskovite solar panels. At 32% efficiency, the oil industry is dead, killed off, because the cost of electricity generation is driving to zero. We can get to 50% energy efficiency, and we do that using biohybrid solar panels, basically that have bacteria, and that's, again, a story in itself. If we use carbon nanotubes within a solar panel to trap the heat and convert that into electricity, you get a solar panel with 80% efficiency. These are game changers. This fundamentally rewrites global energy infrastructure. Just this one slide, let alone all the other things basically we've got going on. We also have solar panels that today work in the rain, work in the snow. We also have solar panels that work at night. Yeah. So again, if you live in a cold, wet, rainy country like the UK, we can use solar panels. You have a thin sheet of graphene over a solar panel, and when rain runs over the top of it, generates electricity. So the energy revolution is only just getting started. From an entertainment perspective, we have the rise of, you'll know these things as deep fakes, but we have the rise of synthetic media. We have artificial intelligences that create art, that create music, that create images, that create videos. We also have digital humans. So digital humans, we can make them in a variety of different ways, either using deep fake type technology or just using what we call vanilla artificial intelligence technologies. When we have a look at these sort of digital humans, these avatars, we now have 5 Fortune 100 CEOs that are now trying to immortalize themselves as an avatar, with the idea being that when they die, the boards of their companies can literally dial them up and say, Ian, we're thinking about taking over company A. What do you think? So increasingly, these avatar-like technologies start opening up a rather odd door to digital immortality. While genetic engineering lets us clone our old dead ancestors. Again, that's a different story for probably another time. But some of these avatars and some of these artificial intelligences are now starting to run their own fully autonomous companies. Companies like IDA, basically out of Hong Kong, which is a hedge fund. We also have autonomous companies on the rise, basically across Russia, Europe, and Wall Street. So they've started typically in the communications and financial sectors, but we have autonomous companies. Now, one of these digital avatars, I'll introduce you to him. Basically, he's called Will. Will has taught over 250,000 children about renewable energy, but he's not a bot. He's a neural network.
Hi, I'm Will. I work at Vector helping young people learn about renewable energy. Here's what happened when I met some students for the first time. I can help you become an energy expert. What should we start with?
Geothermal genius.
Magma from the Earth's core comes close to the surface and we end up with volcanoes, hot springs and geysers. But do you know what magma is?
Molten rock from the outer core.
Absolutely right.
I thought Will was really fantastic.
Like he's there looking at us. Like it's like a real human.
Here's a quick question for you. What do you think is the windiest city in the world?
Wellington.
Nice. If the sun is so far away, how long do you think it takes sunlight to reach us?
10 minutes.
Correct. You're a solar superstar. I was curious if they liked me.
It's different from like talking to Will than talking to like Siri, for example, because like he's there, you can see him.
He was quite human-like, even though he's an AI.
Then the human version of me arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was cool. We got some really good reactions out of a few kids. Yeah.
It's really cool.
A couple of them didn't recognize me straight away. You know, it's me, eh?
Oh, yeah. True, I can see that.
It's a bit of a shock seeing my digital avatar for the first time. It's like looking in the mirror, I guess.
Let's face it, he may look like me, but I'm the one who knows about energy.
Yeah, I think Will could be used as an education tool in many areas.
We did learn some things that we didn't know. Wellington is the windiest city. I learned that you wouldn't notice if the sun went away for 10 minutes.
It's not just a blank screen they're staring at, answering questions, so they feel like they're actually interacting with a human.
He was a good teacher.
It was great meeting the thinkers of tomorrow, because together we can shape our energy future.
However, so Will does not have pre-programmed responses, hence a neural network. Within the next 3 years, you won't be able to tell basically that Will is actually a digital avatar. Same with deepfake technologies that you look on the fake news and the web and all these sorts of social media platforms. So all of these quirks get ironed out. When you start combining avatars with conversational artificial intelligence, we are on the cusp of creating a whole variety of new virtual influencers. Sony are investing in artificial intelligence, pop stars, and. So, and if you want to kind of create your own videos, for example, when we start talking about content, but you don't know how to create your own content, this is from Stanford University. There's a new one that's just literally been released. Just write. So you write your script, or you have an artificial intelligence write your script for you, and AIs will transpose that straight into a synthetic video for you. Companies like Coursera and Udacity are using these technologies already. They take a lecture course, which is a text-based lecture course, and again, you can look these up, and they create a deep fake version where they have a lecturer that is talking to you a little bit like Will, teaching you. Reuters have just rolled out a similar, what they call a perpetual newscaster that just reads the news. But again, he actually looks, he's from Synthesia, which is a UK company. He actually looks very realistic, and you can sort of see them all for yourselves. From a healthcare perspective, we can 3D, science fiction, back to that. Science fiction, we can 3D print a whole variety of human organs, from brain and heart tissue all the way through to bone, corneas, skin, and all kinds of different things. We can already replace over 70% of the human body. And if we can 3D print a human heart, and we can 3D print electronics, why can't we combine the two to 3D print a hybrid human heart that contains electronics that are able to communicate with you when something goes wrong? So these technologies are all converging. In vivo gene editing, we take a technology called CRISPR, and we've done this twice now. We put a gene editing tool basically into an intravenous drip for a patient who had Hunter's syndrome in the US. The good news about Hunter's syndrome is that you die in 20 years. The bad news with Hunter's syndrome is that you die painfully in 20 years. So we take a gene edited serum, we put this patient, and again, you can Google this, we put this patient basically onto an intravenous drip. He had tea in bed while he's fed this genetically engineered tool. It clips out the faulty inherited gene, clips in the new one. He no longer has Hunter's syndrome. So in vivo gene editing, where we can inject something into you and it edits your genome in vivo in real time, is here. Furthermore, when we combine this type of technology with messenger RNA, we can put messenger RNA with gene editing technologies and tools into an aerosol. You can use those aerosols to help cure cystic fibrosis with an aerosol. So we don't need to inject you with anything nowadays. So again, these are already here. They start maturing, and they eventually you'll find that these things work their way into the market. When we have a look at the mysteries of the mind, we're already using technologies like optogenetics to edit people's minds like you edit a Word document. We can edit out addiction. We can put new memories into your head. We can put new memories into songbirds' heads that let them sing songs that they've never ever heard before. At a very, very basic level, we've transferred the memories between two snails because we can. So when we start having a look at the world of neuroscience and being able to unlock and do different things, basically, should we say, to people's memories, which then changes, does that change who they are, and so on and so forth, we are quite scarily close to doing some quite intriguing, interesting, and quite terrifying things. Nanobots, we've already created nanobots that are able to drill into human cells. We've also created nanobot swarms that we can steer, and that particular one was out of China. And as we start maturing out nanobot swarms, we get to the point where we can do in vivo human surgery. And I have videos of that, just not in here. Robosurgeons, when you combine 5G with a robot surgeon, you can have a surgeon based in Washington, DC, operating on a patient in California. So the surgeon can work from home, or can work from the office, or work from the New York hospital, wherever. In addition to that, basically, we have autonomous robot surgeons now starting to come through. There's one again over in China that implanted 2 teeth autonomously by itself into a female patient. And when the dentists had a look at the work, they said it was better than the work they do. We've had robosurgeons that have actually treated gastrointestinal diseases basically within human patients. And again, the surgeons have said that they've done a better job than the humans. We have neurosurgical bots going through trials at the moment, and there's one robot, autonomous robot, that conducts brain surgery, albeit a prototype, 50 times faster than a human neurosurgeon. And then in addition to that, basically we now have robots, in vivo robots that are able to travel in your body that are equipped with 3D bioprinters. So if you've got a gastrointestinal tear, you can send the robot in and it will 3D print human tissue onto that tear to cure your internal injury. So again, that's actually from China, that one. Maybe there's a pattern. When we talk about ultimate designer humans, we have used CRISPR and gene editing technologies, again, like the ones we have in China, to create designer babies that are immune to particular diseases like HIV, meningitis, bronchitis, and all those kinds of things. We've also created designer babies out of the UK, the US, and Mexico, where we've used gene editing technologies to eliminate inherited genetic diseases from these babies. And Harvard, MIT, and University College of London are working on creating the world's first artificial human genome. That means that you will be able to create fully synthetic humans. They reckon that that will be ready in 2036. But then in addition to that, using gene editing technologies, we've already turned human liver cells and other human cells into dual core computers. So this harks back to the biological computer, as I mentioned earlier. We've managed to turn human cells into biological computers that are able to identify particular biomarkers traveling around people's blood. So say, for example, a flu virus, and then synthesize the vaccines and the treatments in vivo. So humans as a biological supercomputer, we have a path to that, and we've already demonstrated that it's possible. When we have a look at retail, Amazon is turning itself into a fully autonomous retailer, where we have 3D printed clothes, we have fully autonomous fulfillment, so robot pickers basically that replace human pickers. We also have fully autonomous delivery systems and all sorts of things. And then from a transportation perspective, and we're almost there now, we have obviously fully autonomous vehicles now coming through. We have batteryless electric vehicles. This is the Lamborghini Terzo Millennio. Should be ready by about 2030. It's an electric vehicle, so it's an electric hypercar where the shell of the car is the battery. It doesn't have lithium-ion batteries any longer. You could then wirelessly charge this as well. So when you think about your Tesla that's got a massive battery pack under its chassis, we can get rid of all of those. And we're already doing that today with Toyota, Hyundai, and Lightyear One, where we actually have commercial solar cars. Remember when I said that we have solar panels where we have a pathway to 132% efficiency? You start putting a spray-on solar panel skin onto any car, you get rid of the batteries. We have Hyperloops, which are trains in a vacuum pod that can travel between Mach 1 and Mach 3. The Mach 3 version is called the T-Flight. And at that speed, you start competing with air travel. But of course, when we start having a look at the future of air travel and just sort of global transportation in general, this next thing has already gone through 70 flight tests. You've probably seen them if you read anything at all, which I'm sure you do, obviously. This is from SpaceX. If you think of the Falcon Heavy from SpaceX and the Crew Dragon, this is what's already been tested. But how would you like to live on the East Coast or the West Coast and go and work for the day in Australia and then pop back home in the afternoon? So everything that I've showed you today, basically, this is the equivalent of one snowflake on the tip of the giant iceberg. There is so much more that I haven't shown you. But hopefully I've managed to show you that we already live in a world basically where science fiction is science fact. And actually in a world basically where increasingly science fact is stranger than science fiction. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.